I'm a social media team member for the International Society of Nephrology's World Congress of Nephrology 2022. Today, I am in conversation with one of the brightest stars of the nephrology universe, Dr. Les Lightstone. Dr. Lightstone is Professor of Renal Medicine and Council Faculty of Medicine at the Imperial College London. She is also an honorary consultant renal physician in the ISCHNT Renal and Transplant Center at the Hammersmith Hospital. One of her areas of interest is lupus nephritis, and she is a co-author on the 2012 EULAR guidelines on the management of lupus nephritis, as well as the 2017 British Society of Rheumatology guideline on the management of lupus. She is also a world-renowned authority in pregnancy in women with kidney disease and is a co-author on the 2019 Renal Association guideline on the management of pregnancy in women with kidney disease, in addition to being the co-opted renal expert in the NICE guideline on intrapartum care of high-risk pregnancy. More importantly, she has had a long-held interest in kidney disease in ethnic minorities and wrote the position paper in this subject in 2002, which paved the way for a whole program of research. She has been an active champion of women in medicine and nephrology and is particularly passionate about this. I have to admit that I am in absolute awe. Thank you so much for sparing the time for today's interview, Dr. Lightstone.
It's a complete pleasure to be here. Thank you for such a big build-up.
I'm going to start by saying that for me and a number of nephrologists around the world, you have been a source of inspiration. But I do wonder, where is it that you find your inspiration and your enthusiasm and the motivation for your work?
I think, well, in various places. When I was growing up in nephrology, as it were, it was in an all-male world. And I had one or two senior women above me who were huge inspirations, Caroline Savage, Edwina Brown. But there were remarkably few women up there, and it was a bit of an oddity. And then when I had children, that was more of an oddity. So I grew up in a male world, but they were very supportive people around me. They just didn't quite necessarily understand, the differences. And you sort of had to play the game the man's way. And what I hope I've done is brought an alternative approach, and that you don't have to do everything the same way. Slightly, as I always tend to wear bright colors, but I used to go to meetings where every person was a man in a gray suit, and it was really dull. And so I sort of got bolder as the years went by. I'm inspired, actually. There was one of my early mentors was Professor Sir Keith Peters, and we all used to moan that we had no idea where we were going in our careers or what was going to be there for us. And he said, what you don't realize is we look down and we're worried about who's coming up. And actually, I look down the line, if you like, and I see extraordinary people coming up, and an enormous amount of the enthusiasm and pleasure I've got is in the trainees I've known over the years, many of whom are women now, and actually I think it's majority women certainly in our unit, and who are extraordinary. They're so together, they have family lives, they do work, they do their PhDs, they are inspirational. So I get it from my colleagues around me, from people. I really, really enjoy talking about lupus and pregnancy and kidney disease. So the people I mix with academically, but also the trainees coming up have continued to, encourage me. It's not all one way. We get inspired by the people around us.
That's really amazing. So speaking of work, could you tell us something about the projects you're currently involved in?
So I've got slightly distracted in the last couple of years, as has most of the world, I suppose, by COVID. But from the point of view of the impact on the immunosuppressed population, so I've been pretty busy working with my amazing colleagues, Michelle Willicombe and Steve McAdoo, looking at the immune response in immunocompromised patients. So that's included transplant patients with autoimmune disease and those on dialysis. And we showed very early on the susceptibilities, we documented the clinical patterns, and we've done a lot of work on the immune responses. And that's led into policy about third vaccines and now fourth vaccines for the immunosuppressed. So that's sort of ongoing work. My background work carries on in its own small way, looking at, we're really still focusing on trying to minimize steroids and lupus nephritis, but I'm involved in some clinical trials as a PI. And I'm very pleased that colleagues in France have taken forward the model of rituximab, which didn't progress as a trial because everyone was on steroids and we couldn't get them off it, but is doing a trial called Obiloop in France, which is using obinutuzumab instead of rituximab, but trying to minimize steroids. And the other work we're doing, particularly in collaboration with Dr. Kate Bramham from King's, is trying to look much more closely at how we can predict women with CKD and pregnancy and who's going to do badly. And also an interventional trial using beetroot juice, because beetroot juice is a food, but reduces blood pressure because it's a nitric oxide donor. So it's quite exciting to be involved in an interventionist trial in pregnancy and kidney disease. So there's lots of projects going on. It's all been quite disrupted by COVID, but the COVID work has taken on a life of its own.
Yeah. But all of this sounds really fascinating, and I'm sure it's going to have a lot of relevance in the way we practice nephrology. At the WCN, you'll be speaking on application of guidelines in low middle income countries. And I know that this is a subject you have been keenly interested in. Could you give us something like a snapshot of your talk?
Yeah, the session that I'm in is the Women in Nephrology session, but that's been jointly set up this year with the newly formed Women in Nephrology India group run by Amila, and which is a really enthusiastic group. And we came up, we wanted an all women speaker panel. We're fed up of manels, but we were interested in the topic of, this is a global meeting and there are global issues. You know, people know how to manage conditions, and we have all guidelines that come out from KDIGO and the ISN and wherever, but we need to think about how things are applied in different countries and different settings. So we came up with a theme for the symposium about translating stuff from high income countries to lower middle income countries. And my focus in my talk is on the use of guidelines. And I think what I've learned actually from social media, you know, learning from people on Twitter, there's no lack of expertise. Everyone around the globe in all these, they know what to do, but you're resource strapped. If you're in India or Africa, you haven't got access to the same funds for treatments, and the new treatments and the guidelines are often very expensive. So what I've tried to do in my talk, which was a new talk for me, it's a very short talk, which I did very fast, is to sort of think about, well, is everything that's new and shiny good and necessarily the best thing to do? And what is the evidence out there that actually some of the older treatments might be just as effective? And I hang the story around a patient, because we can learn from a patient in a higher middle income country that actually what would be done, say, in India. I use India as the comparator, partly because we're doing it in India, but I know the system there quite well. And actually talk about how we make assumptions that new and expensive is what we need to do, but actually there's good evidence, say, for cyclophosphamide and steroids, which are cheap but very effective, and you can still go for lower doses of things. You know, you can still have those principles that we say are sacrosanct in a high income country, they can be applied in low income country, and in fact might be more appropriate because infections are a bigger issue in some countries. So lower dose of immunosuppression are a good thing. So that's the sort of tack I've taken. It was enlightening for me to think about it. And then there's the whole issue about equity, and is it equitable to say that a country that has lower resource should therefore use their resource differently, and you provide a cheaper treatment to more people might be slightly less effective? You know, what's the ethical approach? And I was directed to a really fascinating report by Valerie Lucics, who's really an expert in this area. And it was enlightening reading for me about the ethics of how you think about these things. But I think we need to think about them more and more, because people's knowledge is now global. They know what they want to do, but they've got to think about what's the best way of applying that, and what can be translated and what might not be practical.
This really sounds really fascinating, and I know that I'm looking forward to your talk, and I think all the viewers will agree that this is not a talk that we want to miss. So is there anything that you would like to add for all the viewers here?
Oh, well, please do join the session. It's not only open to women, it's open to everybody. And actually, anyone can join Women in Nephrology if you're interested in being an ally. You don't have to be a woman to join Women in Nephrology. But the actual session, the first talk is it safe to do randomized controlled trials in low and middle income countries? That's been terribly relevant in COVID, but it's also, I use the example of lupus nephritis in my talk, but it's very relevant. The talk's being given by Dr. Ona Smith from Cambridge. And, you know, even in lupus, the voclosporin studies had a problem in their phase 2, but in Bangladesh. And that might have been due to local healthcare, but they carried on. But there's a whole ethical issue about doing trials in countries who are never going to be able to afford the drugs that you're trialing, but you have to do a global trial. I don't know what Rona's going to say, but I'm sure there'll be an element of that. And then we have a talk from Dr. Pace in India about challenges in end-stage kidney disease in children in lower middle income countries. So these are really interesting topics, and I think they throw into highlight both the excellence of what's being offered, and that solutions need to be local. It's not for me to come in and say how you should do something in a low middle. Come to me for advice if you want it, but actually it's for the local experts to decide the best way to use their resource and how to best manage it.
I come from a low middle income country myself, and I know that your talk is really going to help us and maybe utilize the guidelines in a better way for our own patients.
Well, I might learn. I'm looking forward to the feedback from the talk.
Thank you so much for being with us here today, and we wish you more and more power.
Thank you very much. Absolute pleasure. I'm really looking forward to the meeting.